You're listening to Dropping Pins, a story-based learning series from the OKS Hunter podcast, hosted by Derek Melkor, and aimed at helping you hone your whitetail hunting skills. You'll hear the aha moments when known and unknown proven whitetail killers started consistently putting mature bucks on the ground.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Dropping Pins, a podcast brought to you by the OKS Podcast Network. The Dropping Pins podcast, as you probably know by now, a educational podcast. We're trying to talk to a whole bunch of different folks with different styles, different locations all across the country who all have one common goal, and that goal is to chase down a big old slunger buck. So today we've got a great guest on, somebody who, if you're part of any of the social media circles, especially on Facebook, or have purchased or asked questions about anything made by Lone Wolf Custom Gear, you've probably got some really helpful responses from this gentleman. He is known as the Stache Squatch for his gigantic stature and manly, beautiful mustache that he wears proudly out into the woods, and has helped a whole bunch of folks online with hunting and gear questions. So today we've got Zack Robb on the show from Lone Wolf Custom Gear. Zack, welcome to the show. How you doing, buddy?
Hey here. How's it going, guys? Yep. Happy to be here. I'm, as he said, I do work with Lone Wolf Custom Gear and help with product support, some product development, all kinds of stuff, and help out on some of the forums and try to basically be there for anybody that has any questions about pretty much anything related to the gear, and sometimes some deer too. So I think you nailed it.
I gotta toot your horn a little bit, because I've been part of those hunting groups for a long time on social media, and most of those groups are not very helpful. But I've seen you hundreds of times, really just providing unbiased, good advice without being a dick, which is pretty rare in that space. So I just want to say thanks for doing that and helping people out, because it doesn't happen often.
Yeah, I definitely see that a lot on all the pages. There's I don't feel that way. I don't feel better than anybody. I feel like I'm right there with everybody in the trenches, but I do get my hands on at least all the gear and kind of work through all the kinks and try to be there to help other people. And then in terms of the deer side of things, I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, and I don't repeat information that I didn't find to be true for myself. And I'm not going to tell people something that I don't believe either. So everything that I kind of go by is straight from the heart. And if I don't know the answer, I'm going to say, got no idea. No reason to lie,
man.
Right?
And that's one of the reasons I really was wanting to talk to you, just because you're just a really helpful guy, a humble guy, and you found some success, and you're always looking to kind of up your game. And you and I've talked a little bit here and there about some of your past seasons successes and some tribulations you've had. And I just thought it'd be awesome to get you on here. So I appreciate you jumping on with us, Zack. We'll start off with a little bit of background. I asked all the guests pretty much the same opening question, so our listeners have a little bit of background on where you grew up hunting and what kind of stuff you're most familiar with. So give us a little background, where you're from, what kind of stuff you would consider your bread and butter, or the stuff that you're most comfortable hunting.
Sure. Bread and butter, I'm still looking, right? But so I was born and raised. I haven't left this area. Kind of in a 10-mile circle I've lived my whole life, in Central Virginia, kind of on the eastern side of the heavy mountainous region. So the very western Virginia gets really mountainous, and I'm still in some of those kind of arduous classed mountains just on the very eastern edge of it, where it turns more to the Tidewater Piedmont region. So I have some farmland and some kind of valley ag, and then the mountains themselves. So I grew up kind of hunting mostly on these farms in the bottom of the mountains. Not so much ag, but just farms with your, the hill country with the oaks and all rolling through them. And then as I kind of progressed into taking hunting more seriously, coincided with living on a piece that had monster deer. And so that obviously, burns a fire in you when you see them all summer long in the soybeans, and they're there. That puts a burning desire in you. And that place, he came off there. I've had a lot of my good bucks came off of that piece, which is, that's essential to be hunting a good deer, a specific caliber that you're after. You gotta have them to kill them first of all. But after that, had a wife and kids, and we ended up needing to buy a house that had a little more room. And so we moved off of that farm and bought a house and lost permission on that farm. So that was a bummer. And kind of lost a lot of permission as land ownership changes. I'm sure that's, it's big everywhere right now, people losing land. And that's why public is probably thriving and then I got permission on this large mountain piece. And ever since then, even though it's way harder, I just love hunting the mountain. There's something to it. It's like the hard work is earned, and you just have so much more respect for those animals, and the challenges they present. So
I think what you said before with, people losing permission and stuff, and I've never really had like a permission property or that I've like been able to hunt or solely just myself, but I've got lots of buddies who've had that, and especially in areas that have held big deer, like you mentioned, that property was a good property, held big. People just started to realize like what it's worth, and that what, outfitters or even just people looking to lease, like, holy cow, instead of letting these guys kind of, hunt it for free, I can actually make some really good money off of that. And you can't really blame the landowner, but man, it sure made hunting that much harder for the average guy and swelled the public lands up, as you know. And but it is what you said there. If you enjoy the grind and you enjoy the challenge, it made it a little bit more challenging. So now every one that you can get on, that's really something to hang your hat on.
Yeah,
it's pretty
absolutely.
It's kind of like a double-edged sword, like it's a good and a bad at the same time.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's just kind of, and that's another thing. I'm just going to go where it takes me. And I'm not huge on, I don't see myself personally spending a ton of money on a lease. I don't know. These things roam around in people's yards. It's hard for me to want to drop some serious cash on a lease, but maybe that'll change one day. It's hard to say. At this time, I find my peace in the mountains.
You never want to. Yeah, that's awesome. You never want to write something off, because you get the right situation with the right group of friends or people. Like, sometimes you got to take advantage of that. So
and I'm not knocking that.
So now
either.
for sure. So you kind of explained in the beginning that you were kind of in what sounded like the foothills, like the area where the mountains kind of came down. The property you're hunting now, pretty steep mountainous stuff, pretty serious aggressive terrain.
Yep, it is pretty much from the bottom quarter of the mountain. Really, it's the whole mountain all the way to the top, and it is steep and gnarly. Wow. It's thick with briars. The whole thing sucks, and I love
it. I'm sure, and we'll get in, because I know I asked Zach to maybe have a story or two that had some cool learning moments or experiences that just kind of maybe changed how he thought about it. But man, what a transition that must have been. You think just like any kind of flatter, more agricultural land, and then you go into something that's just vastly more aggressive and difficult to hunt. Right. You got to change what you're doing if you're going to find success. So I'm just curious, and maybe this leads into one of your stories here, but what exactly were your thoughts? New property, but like a little bit different terrain also. Like, did you kind of revamp it, or did you stick to your regular game plan of just scout, make an educated guess, and hunt? Or what changed for you?
Well, so I was lucky the year I picked up this property. I had also gained permission on a small property, very small property, right at the base of it, believe it or not. And that's where I killed this guy right here, which is one of my stories for you.
Okay.
And this deer here, he kind of, the first time I was on the property, I jumped him with the farmer. He was showing me this little chunk of property, and I jumped this buck, and I watched him get up, run about 40 yards, turn and look back and just wait. And I'm just standing here. And believe it or not, he started to even curl around and go back to his bed. Like his bed did his job. It was a small piece of property. And he had a nice little spot where he saw us coming and he had an escape route. And I even like a dummy, I started to walk towards his bed to see if I could get a better look at him. He's not that far away. My eyesight's just not good. And he turned and ran away again and paused and started to motion back again. And so I was like, wow, okay, that's his bed.
He likes
and
it.
He's gonna
Yeah,
die.
he likes that spot.
Yeah. So I put a mock scrape. I found like a heavy travel corridor that was headed to that area he was bedded in, and I put a mock scrape just off of it. I'm no Troy Pottinger with the mock scrapes. So I just went for it. I snapped a twig. I pissed in the leaves and kicked them, and set a camera. And, first card pull, which mind you, I got this property in late August. So I had 1 month to figure something out, find a deer and get on it. And first card pull was halfway through September and that deer was all over. And I was like, man, this is going to work. And so that was the first time I really found a deer, found his bed, hung a camera, and I was actually pinpointing the intel from what I had on camera, like what winds and what conditions is he coming through here to go to this bed. I don't remember, but let's say it was west.
Okay. I got 2 questions for you before you go on in the story here. Number one, his bedding spot, that spot that he obviously liked and he was circling back when you first jumped him. What kind of, was that like a traditional spot you would think of a buck bedding, or what did that look like? Was it a little knob or just a little overlooked spot, nobody bugged him?
Yeah, so this is kind of I would call this area like an overlooked spot, and this was one of the highest points on it.
Okay.
And to the backside of it is a large roadway and interstate. So I've loved hunting interstates. That's a great corridor for travel, especially during rut times. Whole different topic. But so I knew he would feel safe with that behind him. And
does that interstate have like a big chain link fence that runs along it?
No, not in this, not in this stretch. Not in this stretch. There are places like that, and I was praying they'd build that same fence right behind my house, but they didn't.
Okay.
Because man, that would be sweet. But so I kind of, when he jumped up, it made sense. He was on a high point and had a best visual of all the trails coming to that property, and had a getaway. He knew nothing was going to come at him from that backside. At least I felt that way. And so yeah, that was the first time I was able to kind of put one on camera and analyze the data to put together a pattern, which was really cool. And damn if it didn't work. I mean, the first time I went in, I ended up seeing him as I was packing up. Blew that chance. And he took off. But I ended up killing him on October 15th. So it was still very early season for us. That's 2 weeks in. And it all just kind of came together. Ended up even bumping him that day. The classic bump and dump. I came in for an afternoon sit. I knew he was starting to mess with the does. Some people had told me they'd seen him crossing the roads. And I bumped him up with the wind in my favor. He just heard leaves crunching and took off. And I could see his tail through the saplings. I set up, I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but I set up and he came trotting right back. As soon as I got war paint on, turned the camera on, he was coming right back to see what it was. And it was just sweet. So like I said, that deer was super territorial.
That's really cool. When you bumped him that day that you ended up killing him, was that off of that same little ridge, that same knob, or was he embedded up in a different area?
It's I would say probably 70 yards away. He had shifted to messing around with a doe group.
Gotcha.
And this is a small property, so it's not a huge shift there. But yeah, I jumped the does first, and they took off. Again, they just heard me. They didn't smell me or see me because it was just the way it worked out. And then I saw him get up and kind of trot off, and I was in disbelief when I saw him coming right back. It was like, man,
That's cool.
you know, I had a meeting at 7:30, and I was early, and I had a big buck in my truck. There you go, boys.
It doesn't work like that
No.
often, but man, when it does, that's sweet, man. That's really
Yeah,
sweet.
I thought I was a pro then. I thought I nailed it. I was like, oh, this is easy.
I got this all figured out. This is all I got to do. Just keep doing
Yep.
this. Yeah.
Yep.
And you and I both know how that goes, but it's nice when it does work out the way you want. I was just curious. So you mentioned a little bit about that bedding knob. When you set up that little mock scrape and you had your camera that you were kind of getting intel of like, okay, he likes to come off this way when the wind's doing this. About how far away from where you had bumped him in August did you set up your camera? Were you fairly close? Did you make that mock
Yeah.
scrape like in a spot you planned on hunting, or was it just to get some pictures so you kind of knew a little bit more about him?
Pretty much just for intel. It was about 40 yards from where he actually had jumped, and it was just off of a little trail coming through this property. My intention was using that. I could confirm that he was using that trail, which he was, which gave me which little drainage he was using, and I could set up in that drainage, and that is how it went down. And I had my first encounter with him, which that's all on my Whitetail Addictions episode. Of course, I had just put my camera away, so the footage, I don't have the footage of him. You got the footage of me being like, "Gah!" Which is that's how it goes. But yeah, it was pretty cool. It just kind of being in the arena with that deer, which this is a shed that I had found from that deer 3 years earlier. And I didn't know that was that deer's shed until my daughter picked up the shed and was twirling around. She was like 18 months old and just picked it up and was twirling around. I caught the angle just right. I was like, wait a minute. It wasn't far away from the property I used to hunt. And I had found that shed right behind our house. And yeah, I mean, it's him like 100%. Every curvature is exactly the same, which kind of told me that deer was likely six or 7 years old. And he cool just found this little quiet dude. I was ecstatic. It's super cool. I got a picture of him laid out on the table. I mean, they're identical. It's super cool.
That's I feel like that kind of go. I mean, what a cool occurrence. And we've had that also. My parents and I are big shed hunters, and we've had sheds laying, within feet of deer or other sheds that like it just takes the right time to be like, wait, that no way, that couldn't be that. And then you hold it up and you're like, holy shit, it is. But with your story, man, that just who knows how long that buck was living on that smaller property, but like when you paint the picture of like the small property and the older farmer is going to take you like it just feels like one of those spots that nobody's hunting or bugging them, and that buck probably found that spot and just lived there for 3 or 4 years, just total solitude. He had the world by its ass and just sitting on that hill, safe as could be, till Zack Robb Stache Squatch came and laced them up.
That was I had the classic arrow. This was the first one. This is when the Stache Squatch was born. It says, "Don't mess with the Stache Squatch," and that's the one that zoinked him. And so that buck very special to me. Just everything about it. And, my daughter was super young and son wasn't born yet, so just really cool memories. And that one taught me a lot about a deer that may be patternable. He also taught me, well, the next deer would teach me that they're all different. Every deer has a different temperament, just like you and I do. And that's a huge learning process.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think if every deer was, the recipe you followed on that one, like you just said, having every deer being a little bit different with their behavior, if you figured it out, it would be a cakewalk. But as you said, we all know each deer does something different. And so some deer cover 7-10 miles a night. Some deer, they don't leave their 80 acres very often, and that's something that you figure out, and you just hope that the next one you
Yeah.
find is the one that likes the one
Right.
spot instead of all the spots, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
definitely.
man.
That's since shifting to the mountain, that has not been the case. Some of the deer that I've hunted up there got killed 3 or 4 miles away from where I was hunting them. And it's just, it's wild because it'd take me hours to get to where the deer was killed, and it's a daily thing for
Like
them.
nothing. Like
Yeah.
nothing. Just to paint a little bit of a picture, the property you're on now that's in the little bit bigger mountains, the properties like that one itself, just wondering size wise, and then like neighboring properties, are they pretty big blocks or do you have like a lot
Yep.
of smaller acreage? What kind of stuff are you looking at for like hunting pressure?
So the property that I hunt I think it's like 2,600 acres, 3,000 acres. It's plenty of land. Now there's like 40 of us up there, and there's trails all over it for four-wheelers. And people even ride their SUVs up there, and during rifle season, stuff gets blasted out of windows. Like it's it's backwoods. And
Oh yeah.
there's other properties that cut up into it to kind of break it up and make it feel a little smaller. So yeah, it's a large property, and there's definitely places you can get away from other pressure and people, but it's not 3,000 acres to myself.
Yeah. Totally different.
There's plenty of pressure from outside people, even trespassers. We've caught 3 miles up on us. It's like, really? That's a hell of a hike. Um, but yeah, it's a large chunk of property. It's enough that you can find a deer and kind of track them down and figure out what areas they're playing in, for sure.
In Virginia, do you guys have, I don't know anything about hunting in Virginia, um, but do you guys have baiting? Are there people that bait in Virginia, or is that not legal?
No, no. We're allowed to have mineral sites, I believe, until September. So it's got to
Okay.
be 30 days before deer season comes in that you clean them up. And I think, I don't do any of that. So pardon me if my rules are incorrect, but you're supposed to like go dig the dirt up even and take it
Oh,
away from
really?
there. Yeah, they get serious about it.
I was just
And I
curious.
don't know.
I
I
was
don't
just
know
saying,
what the reasons are.
yeah, for digging it up and whatnot. I wonder if that's got something to do with CWD or transmission of diseases. But I was just curious, being on a property like that with that many different people, you hear from guys who hunt in states like Ohio and whatnot that have baiting, and you hunt on a
Oh,
property with a bunch of people, and if you're not baiting, everybody feels like you almost have to just because it messes with deer movement. So I was just curious if that was something that you had to deal with or compete with, or if you're able to just really hunt the deer based off of pressure and terrain, which is ideal.
yeah. Primarily off of pressure and terrain. Um, like I said, it's mostly covered with briars, and there's plenty of oaks. So the food is not isolated, which makes it a little tough because there's no reason for them to be in any specific spot.
Mm-hmm.
They can pretty much survive in any of those 3,000 acres just as equally as the rest of it. So that kind of makes it tricky to narrow something down. Um, but yeah, so there would be no
So
need to bait, in my opinion. There's plenty of food on that mountain.
yeah, if there's acorns there, and like you said, when it's not isolated, they can pick their spots just about anywhere, and probably be laying in spots where acorns are falling on their heads all day long, and they don't have to move too far. So how have
Right.
you gone about kind of deciding where and how to focus your efforts in terrain like that, where there's plenty of cover and plenty of food? What's kind of been your strategy?
It's taken me some time. Um, it's taken me a couple years of really putting a lot of boots on the ground. I don't e-scout a ton, at least not on, maybe like when I went out west to some public land, e-scout as much as I can before I get there. But on this mountain in particular, when you look at the map, you kind of see mountain, a couple pinches, whatever, but you really got to go look at them. And so it's taken me a couple years to really cover a lot of serious ground and, find the areas with some of the historic rubs all over. or heavy trails, other than human trails. And with a couple years of data from cameras, and I don't run a ton of cameras because bears eat them all up, but I've found a couple spots where year after year I'll get solid bucks cruising through an area, and that kind of tells me where to start. And more than that, if I have 3 deer that I would be happy to shoot in one area of the mountain versus one in another area of the mountain, that tells me where to start. You know, I like to hunt a specific deer, but at the end of the day, with the time allowed, I will gladly take a solid mountain buck that makes me happy in, wherever he shows up and I get a chance, I'll kill him. But that's kind of how I weigh my options on where to hunt, for sure.
Absolutely. I think you and I are in similar boats where we both got young families, and as much as picking out that biggest buck on the trail cam and saying that's your
Yeah.
target for the season sounds like a great idea, man. Every year I know I've got about 6 or 7 that I'm like, any of these walk by, my wife will be happy to know that I'm staying home for a few weekends.
Yeah.
So
Well, so we have 3 tags.
Oh, really?
But in my county, it's a earn a buck. So you get 1 buck tag and 3 doe tags to start. You can't shoot your second buck until you shoot a doe. So you can either shoot all the does right out the gate, and then you got all 3 buck tags, or 1 buck, 1 doe, 1 buck, 1 doe, and then you got all 3 buck tags. So it's actually kind of funny. This year I was on a slammer, and I've been after him for 3 years. I may have sent you a video, I don't know. And man, mega Magnum 8-pointer. He used to be a Magnum 10-pointer. I think that puts him around 8 years old. Not really sure. And I was hunting him, and I got on him and had him at 15 yards for 15 minutes and just couldn't squeak a shot through the brush. I couldn't let myself take a bad shot to try and just kill this deer, and didn't get the shot. So the next sit I went up in there, I had a beautiful 10-pointer, 140-inch 10-pointer come by at 5 yards. My stand was 4 feet off the ground, and because I only had 1 buck tag and I knew I was in the game with that other deer, I let that deer walk. And now looking back, hindsight's 2020. Bit of a regret, because that was absolutely the biggest deer I've ever let pass, and it was a good buck. It was a good buck.
Mind game. That's a real mind game with buck tags. We had that in Wisconsin for a few years, where to earn your buck tag, you had to shoot a doe first. And man, a number of buddies, I didn't really have it happen to me, luckily, but a number of buddies had, target bucks, big bucks walking right underneath them, and they didn't get that earn a buck. That'll mess with you, man.
Yeah. Well, so in my head, I was thinking, when he first stepped through the thicket, and I was hunting really close quarters, I couldn't see these deer what they were until they were about 14 yards. And when he, moved his rack through the thicket and popped up, immediately I was like, it's not him. So right then, I wasn't super jacked up to shoot this deer. Mm-hmm. And then the first thought that came in my mind is, if you shoot this deer and 20 minutes go by and that big boy comes out, dude, I would be so mad. So elected not to shoot him. Got great footage. He's grunting the whole time. He's 5 yards from me. It's pretty cool. But yeah, looking back.
But that's what would have happened. That's how those things work. You would have shot him. That buck would have ran over, smashed into a tree, and called that big buck in, and he would have been parading under you, and you would have been kicking yourself in the rear.
He'd probably be like sniffing my bag at the base of the tree or something. Yeah. So, one thing I preach is it takes time or luck, and I don't have luck, so I wasn't going to push it. That's for sure. Yeah.
I like that. So just curious, that spot where you had, you've been on that big 8, you did send a picture or a video of that thing. It is a Magnum, beautiful giant old mountain buck. I mean, that thing is cool as hell.
Yeah.
That spot you're hunting sounds like you're on the edge of a thicket. Are you typically hunting like the side of the mountain, near the top? Where, like, are you focusing on just, downwind sides of those thickets, or how are you kind of coming up with where you're hunting those bucks?
So that spot was actually dead center of the thicket, and he was
Oh, really?
crossing off of an unhuntable area at the top of the mountain, which I'm not going to give away what it is, but it's unhuntable to everybody.
Okay.
And so I knew that buck was living on us, and he'd cross over into that and then come back on us. And I had multiple years had pictures of this buck at nighttime, only at nighttime, coming out of that thicket on both sides of the thicket and hitting big rubs and scrapes. And it just kind of like clicked on me. I was sick of waiting for this deer, and I was determined to figure out what he was coming from in that thicket. And so that thicket is probably 400 or 500 yards wide, and I just worked a scrape line all the way back to it. And what I kind of noticed was my scrapes that I had cameras on the outside of that thicket, as they went cold, as I worked deeper into that thicket, the scrapes were still open. And, that told me, okay, the pressure from all these other hunters, which I knew was heating up. There was other summit stands hanging all over the place outside of that thicket. And I knew that they had been, feeling the applied pressure from other hunters. And so it kind of made sense. The deeper I worked into this thicket, the more activity and, the foot traffic you could tell was going on. Scrape still opens. One of them even had dark tarsal juice in it. I was like, okay, they're here.
Oh, bingo.
Yeah. So no camera needed. That's where I'm going to hunt. And I sat that area a lot, but I had that buck come in. I think it was the first time I sat in there is when the buck I was after came in there, and
That
I
big
sat
eight?
in that area. Yeah. And matter of fact, my family was at a church chili cook-off that I won, but didn't even go to. Chili was good.
Congratulations.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Yeah, the chili was
Good win.
good. But as everyone was eating the chili, I texted my wife. I was like, I just saw the buck. And she's like, really? And I was like, yeah, he's here. And ended up coming in 15 yards shortly after. And man, it's just an awesome encounter. And really, that taught me, going that extra distance into that thicket and not necessarily waiting. Sure, you could blow him out, but I would have never seen that deer. I've been hunting that deer for 3 years, and he's figured out the hunters pretty good. And he knew that nobody was going in that thicket, but he could sneak back in there and hunker down until night and get around and do whatever he wanted to do with the does and make funny faces in everybody's trail cameras and, the whole 9 yards that they do.
I'm just curious, and I'm not trying to side rail you too much here, but you mentioned something twice now, and I don't hear too many of my guests key in on this, but it's something that I always am interested in. I'm a really big fanatic on rubs, and most guys are always talking about scrapes. I heard you mention historical rubs when you're scouting, and then you just mentioned following rub lines in. I'm curious, is that something that you typically are looking for, like in the spring when you're like postseason scouting? Are you like paying a lot of attention to rubs, or like rubs in those thickets, or what does that mean to you? You know what I'm saying? Like most people just seem to kind of disregard them, but they're a really important part of the game for me. So I'm curious to see what that is for you.
No, rubs jack me up big time. I absolutely, if I see a monster rub, and you can tell if it's a historic rub, and if it's hit freshly this year and you could tell it's an old one, you better know what's going on. You need to put a camera. If you believe in trail cameras, you need to have one there. I had a freaking slammer that I had located a historic rub, put a camera on, and it was really quick. He was hitting it every week, and it was a Magnum. I've had people tell me, oh, rubs don't mean anything. Every year that I have put cameras on big rubs, I see big bucks on big rubs. And even if that's not where you're going to kill that deer, it gives you a piece of the puzzle. You know he's there and you can kind of work it back. Additionally, rubs can tell you a lot of things. How high the rub is can tell you how big the deer is. The direction on the tree that the rub is on, like the face of the tree, that tells you which direction he's coming from normally. And, it's easy to see a rub line. You can see a rub line from 30 yards away, see the next tree, the next tree, the next tree. You can't tell me that doesn't stick out as a trail that they're walking. So no, I think rub lines are huge in, if nothing else, my confidence in an area.
It's always interesting because to me the rubs are showing you where those bucks are wanting to travel really kind of before they start getting interested in the doe. So it's like him showing you his route, where the scrape is like he might come in from any direction after checking does or before checking does. But you get on an earlier season rub line, like you mentioned, you killed that one October 15th. If you can find a good rub line or a good couple clusters of rubs earlier in the season, that buck's telling you where he's walking, and it's probably on a pattern. And you kind of mentioned that thicket that you were hunting. You hunted the middle, and maybe it's different up, in the mountains where you're at. But here, like where I'm at in Wisconsin, any little thicket where there's going to be bucks living in or around, you'll find 20, 30 rubs on the inside edges of these thickets, where that bedding area, like in the middle, like you were talking about. And then as they're working out, they'll just make rubs and kill daylight, before they leave
they're
that
bored.
heavy cover. So you find those clusters of rubs. For me, that's like, oh, I need to hunt within 30 yards of this, and I have a very good chance of seeing this deer in daylight. And I would rather do that than hunt a scrape like 90% of the time. But that's just me. That's just like what I've always done, and I feel like that's what works for me. So I was just really curious, and I'm interested in what you said there.
100%, man. I love scrapes for intel. I love scrapes for trolling. I have never killed a deer on a scrape. Not once.
Me neither.
I have countless incredible videos of deer hitting scrapes. And I've never had one come in and hit a scrape, a big one, that I would shoot during daylight. Not once.
I think the only I shot a buck. He was probably a 3-year-old. I was pretty young, a young hunter. But I had noticed the open scrape, like Wisconsin season opens like the September 15th, 16th, 17th, fairly early. And I think the second weekend of season, so around maybe the 22nd, I had found a scrape that was opened up, and I hunted it early season. And I had like 3 bucks come to it, a little bachelor group. And I ended up hitting one. I think I hit him a little bit high, probably high shouldered him. It rained that night. Never ended up finding him. But I think that was the only deer I've ever shot on a scrape. And it was in September when you least expect a buck to be slamming a scrape. So I was like, maybe I just don't hunt him enough in November. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
Well, actually, I lied to you. This guy, this was my Illinois public land buck. This was on a scrape. That was, first trip out of state, first public land trip. And he died in the last 3 minutes of daylight on the last day we were there, and we had to figure out how to get him 2 miles out. It sucked, but I'd do it again. But that was on a scrape in Illinois. Yep.
Very cool, man. Was that this year?
No, that was 2022.
Very cool, man. That's a nice buck. Last day buck. You can't beat that.
No, I mean, he didn't go Pope and Young. The first look I had at him, I was like, oh, gonna go for it. He didn't go that, and I'm okay with that. No, that buck means the world to me. That was a hard-earned deer. We worked our tails off that week to kill that deer. Me and a buddy really broke this whole property down and discovered that the property sucked, and keyed in on one little thing as far away as you could get from any access. And wouldn't you know, a truck hood size scrape with you could tell that the scrape was fairly fresh and the big hoof prints were dug in there. and were shiny from pressing down so hard in the dirt.
Dang.
And I mean, this was the deer. Like, this deer was 250 pounds. Just
Holy
not a
shit.
stellar rack. Yeah, no, when we walked up to it, my buddies from Alabama, their deer are even smaller than mine. We were like,
And then being the
yeah,
furthest spot back, luckily
yeah,
you're a
yeah,
big strapping guy. Get that out of there.
dude, it was a grind. But yeah, no, that one deer was on scrape. I will say that.
Cool,
Yeah.
man. Yeah. So, I mean, we took some tangents there, but I think those are all good things to cover and just to pick your brain and whatnot. So hearing the story and the cool shed that your daughter was playing with on that buck that's right behind you over your left shoulder, that was really freaking awesome. So now you've progressed. You've started hunting these mountain bucks. Those encounters with that giant 8, that was this past season, right?
Yeah, that's fresh. This past year, man, was crazy because I had the encounter with the deer that I passed, easy kill, and that was a good buck. Early in the season, may have been October 15th. It was right around that time. I actually took a shot at another stud of an 8-pointer and deflected it last light. So I had 3 really close calls this year in the mountains of Virginia, which I typically get one with the time allowed, which, I hunt hard, and my family sacrifices a lot for me to hunt a good bit. And I normally get about 1 encounter a year that I can make it count on. And this year I was able to do 3. So it just wasn't in the cards this year. But no, to put myself in the position to have those opportunities is really, it's a lot. So I was 1 step away from getting a kill this year, but it was a good season nonetheless, and a lot to take away from.
The story of going in and having that encounter with the 10 in the spot you saw that great big 8. I think there's 2 really good takeaways in there that you've already mentioned, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate to any of the listeners is you weren't afraid to dive in when you noticed that there was pressure around the spots that already had sign. You mentioned that you had some scrapes around the edge of the thicket, but you noticed other guys hunting there. That would have been a waste of daylight to sit there.
Yep.
You figured, so you weren't afraid to go in and put pressure on and get where you thought those deer were going to move in daylight, because a lot of guys, it's kind of just your nature that when you see good sign, you feel like you want to post up on it. But if you honestly gut check yourself and say, is one going to walk by in daylight? If the odds are no, push further. And you did that. And then you mentioned that the first time you saw that big one, that big old one, was your first sit in there. That's something that, is well known throughout the hunting industry, that the first time you dive into a spot is typically your best chance on a mature deer. That's something that I think everybody has noticed. Those 2 things. Don't be afraid to push deep. Make your first sit count. Those are 2 huge things that anybody who's listening, who's not, had that opportunity yet, those are 2 things that should be in the back of your mind every season when you go out, because those are 2 things that are absolutely true in every instance that I've ever encountered.
100%, man. So this little piece, the way I looked at it, last year, I used kind of that historic data to get a kill. It was the buck and the bear combo. I had noticed that it's a similar, after it was all said and done, I looked at the big picture, and what I was experiencing with the big buck this year was very similar to where I killed last year in a different spot on the mountain. Kind of like a small ridge, not a main ridge, but a small ridge with a roadway at the top that curved into it. That kind of made a short track for them to not cross the road, which my buck did, and funnel over the hump created by that ridge. And so last year, knowing in years past that I had lots of buck encounters, or a lot of sign, a lot of deer showing up on camera in this one area, I went in with very little intel knowing it was heating up. The years past, I was typically too late to the party. You see all these scrapes everywhere, and I would get all excited and sit, nothing. Come to find out, that was last week's scrapes, or that had just shut down. So I went into that area the week before I typically saw that sign, and I had a camera, bear ate it, and as I was getting in my stand, I had that in my mind, and I shot the bear I saw a bear coming in. I was like, "Damn you, bear!" And I shot it, and I was just kind of hanging out, and here comes the buck. Just like he should have. And I was there for it, as opposed to waiting for the data. I was there for it. I was my own camera in that sense, and got the shot and killed the deer. So that was, it takes that historic data for you to know that for the time frames that you need to be in certain areas before it happens. I'm not a big cell cam guy, and the mountain doesn't necessarily allow for them to be very functional. So without that, you kind of need to either write it down or keep it in your memory bank, some of these dates and when you need to be in certain areas to be there before your next card pull, and you realize you should have been there 3 days ago.
That's something that you hear guys who've spent a lot of time in the woods talk about a lot, is leaving up just, your regular SD cams as soaker cams. Don't even look at them during the season. Don't let them give you false hope. Just get them in there, run them for a full year, wherever it is you think, or, at least well into, late season, and just learn what the deer are doing.
Yep.
That in certain times of years in the area, and use it for the following year. Now, when you got places with isolated oaks, and and like one year this spot's just hot because the oaks were dropping like crazy, next year it may not be that, but the year after, there's a chance that if you walk in there and you see a couple little rubs or a scrape opening up, you might be hitting that historic data just right, and you're not going to know that if you're, that's where I think those cell cams, man. I got a bunch of buddies who hunt off their cell cams religiously, and they're always, it's not like a week behind, but they're always like a couple days behind, because you get the intel, then I got to get in there. By the time you're able to go and jump in there, those deer are doing something slightly different. I mean, it can still happen, but that hunting the picture stuff, it's gotten me in trouble in past, and it gets a lot of people in trouble every year, because you're not ahead of the game.
Right.
Like you mentioned, you've got to plan it out, and if you see a little bit, you just got to jump in and hunt it and hope that you're there when they're starting to make that sound. That's a really good point.
I'll do you one better than that. Cell cams actually totally screwed me, not this past season, but the year before, because I had one on a bench, and I had these bucks cruising through there all September, and it kind of just petered off, and I figured, okay, deer's not coming through there. Matter of fact, it was the buck I was hunting. He was still a big 10-pointer then. And so I didn't really put any faith into that area. That cell cam wasn't active. I'd still get my daily check-ins, maybe a doe or a coyote every now and then. And it wasn't until this past September I went and pulled that camera down, put a new camera up, and I took the camera home and plugged it in. Dude, I had 4 or 5 nice shooters daylighting all through October, and the camera just never sent them. And I was like, how come I got these doe pictures and coyote, but not this slammer buck that I would have shot? So yeah, and that was something going into this season. I was not going to let that. I wasn't going to let a camera tell me where I needed to hunt, because I knew that was a good area. I knew it, and I let that camera tell me otherwise. So that cameras are only a piece of the puzzle for me. And I try not to rely on them. I'm not in a position where I have the time to go chase deer in the mountains and not use them at all. But, they have their place, and it's not to tell me when to go hunt. I can tell you that.
Yeah, absolutely. You just got to think of it as a tool like everything else, and you got to think of how you want to use the tool. I've got buddies, or I've seen guys who, like, their goal is to get really cool pictures, and which is great, and I love looking at those, but my goal is not to disturb the freaking deer, and I just want to know if they're there or not. So getting good pictures is no longer an idea for me. I'd rather have it somewhere further back out of the deer's nose range and get a terrible picture, but know that like, okay, big buck is here. I want to use it for hunting purposes. I'm not making a freaking calendar out of it. So
Right.
like, that's just a luxury some of us can afford. And I think it's probably better off for you not using cell cameras. Bears are bad enough on SD card cams, but like here in Wisconsin, everyone I know who runs cell cams, the bears somehow attracted those antennas. They just rip the antennas off of all of them. They chew the shit out of them. They love them.
So one day walking in this year, I was walking this trail, and it's the area that I had a bunch of other people hunting, and the reason I pushed in. I was walking along the trail, and I saw, oh, there's a Tacticam reveal camera. There's like 5 more yards. There's an antenna. 20 more yards. There's a battery pack. And then it was like another 40 yards. It was like, there's another antenna. They were just running around, just shredding them. And a couple of my Lone Wolf cameras had been shredded too. It's like, man, they're relentless. And yet the bear hunters are like, we haven't seen any.
Hang a couple cameras, you'll find them.
Sit on some of my cameras, man. Yeah, I think I lost probably 4 cameras this year. And I only hang 5 or 6, so
that's pretty rough.
Yeah, it's not good odds, and I put them up high too. So I don't know, man.
Because you do a good amount of self filming. You got some stuff up on the Lone Wolf custom gear channel. That buck and bear video. I mean, you got that all on video.
Yeah, yep. That was
super cool.
That was I didn't realize that was a big deal because I run into bears a lot. Like quite literally, I stepped up on a log to cross it, and one jumped up from under me, and I was like, oh. I see a lot of bears, and I've never been one to really want to kill a bear anyway. I just think they're kind of cool until they started messing with my stuff a whole lot. So then it's like, okay, game on. And now that I've had some of that bear sausage, game over. That stuff is delicious. So I'll be killing every bear that comes in range if I have a tag. But that ended up, that was super fun. A lot of work coming out of the mountain that night, but super worth it. And looking back, it's like, man, that was pretty cool. And it was a nice buck. That one's right here. Probably shouldn't keep it under that deer, but it's a solid mountain buck, good beams, heavy deer. Really, that was an awesome story and a lot of fun.
Yeah, so anybody who's not seen that one, I would highly suggest checking that out on YouTube on the Lone Wolf Custom or Lone Wolf Addiction. Sorry, their YouTube channel, bucking a bear down. Super cool video.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's not eaten bear before, like that's like kind of like a common misconception is that like bear is not a good meat, but man, if you trim it up and get all the fat off it, bear is probably my favorite wild game meat. It is delicious.
I still have some of the ribs. I got to smoke them, but no, the tenderloins are delicious. And then I had the whole rest of the thing turned into breakfast sausage, and we just ran out. And I'm disappointed. I had a chance at a bear this year, and I didn't jump at it, and I should have. Because
if you've not, if you've not made the ribs yet, if you've not tried them, the ribs are fantastic. That's probably my favorite cut off of there. So you're gonna enjoy that. So we're coming up on an hour here, and I told Zach here that I was gonna ask him if he had a little tidbit of a story on a buck that got away or one that somehow didn't go quite as planned. So Zach, you got one that got away that kind of left you with maybe a learning moment other than that giant 8 that you had the encounter with this year?
Well, okay. So yeah, that one, we already talked about that one. So whatever. So I guess it was, I'd have to look. I think it was 2021 is when I mentioned walking past a giant historic rub and putting a camera on it immediately. Yeah. So that was a slammer. He was a buck. I had to be 6 or 7 years old. One of the guys ended up killing him. He had like 6.5-inch bases, just absolutely gnarly for Virginia. And the character was nuts. I'll send you the video and you can put it up here if you want, but a lot of character. And he showed up on that camera and he was rubbing this tree that was, I don't know, it was probably a 10 or 12-inch pine tree. and had rubbed all the bark off of it and put a dent in it. And I was like, man, that is a stud. And got him, once a week, every week, he was hitting that rub. Had me all jacked up, couldn't sleep at night. It was the only place I wanted to hunt was near that freaking tree. Never saw that deer until I was driving up. It's a 7-mile ride on the 4-wheeler where I hunt. And I was riding up, bebopping up the mountain, and dude man was rolling out with him on his 4-wheeler. And I was like, no. And he killed him 4 miles from where that tree was. And so that right there, that deer, he taught me, do not wait, like, especially if you don't have the confidence, like, this deer's never showed up in daylight here. This deer's only coming once a week. He's coming from somewhere. And I poked around a little bit, but I didn't venture far. That deer showed me just how far their range can be. If they don't have that homebody temperament, it's a wide search.
Yeah. And I mean, what do you, 4 miles away, like not much, what do you do? I think sometimes that's where we get caught up in our mind. Like, I think even roads and trails do this to a guy. Like, when you go scout an area, in our minds, we like compartmentalize it. Like, well, I'm going to scout this section between this trail and this trail. And like in our minds, it becomes, that's an area. But to a deer, like, that's not an area. Like, they go wherever they want. So like when we get a picture or like we think like, oh, this is like where he's at, we're like this, and like the area, like we do that to ourselves. That's just how our brains kind of work. But like, yeah, shit, 4 miles away.
Well,
I'd guess
that's
wild.
That buck I was hunting this year, I think he ended up getting killed about 2 miles from where I had him. But that deer, I knew that he had kind of a low bed on the mountain and a high bed or area that he was messing around in. The first time I ever saw him was coming up out of this drainage, and I knew he was using those morning thermals pulling down the drainage to get him up into that safety zone. But where he was bedded low was not in an area that I didn't think it was on the side that we could hunt. There's a property border in that drainage, and I was pretty confident he was on the other side, so I never really pushed it. And he ended up getting shot down there, where I thought, honestly. Jumped him out of his bed and shot him with the rifle, which is, that's how it goes. But
did the fella who shot that big pine tree rub buck, that big gnarly one, was that with a archery equipment, or was that rifle too?
That was rifle. Yep. That guy though is a savage. He grew up, his family had like homestead rock foundations in this mountain, and he's hunted this mountain his entire life. He knows every nook and cranny, and he gets it done. He kills some good bucks up there every year. Rifle, bow, whatever. But yeah, when I saw him coming out with it, I said, well, at least he probably earned it. God.
Oh yeah, dude, that's wild. It just goes to show you when you think keep looking, because you probably don't know it all.
That's a fact, man.
All right, buddy.
I will never think that.
Why don't you just put a little plug in here for yourself, or wherever people can find your videos, check out what you're doing on socials or anything like that. Feel free to put in a little plug for yourself.
Sure thing. So if you want to reach out, my Facebook is pretty private. I leave that to mostly family, but obviously Mobile Hunters United, which is a Lone Wolf sponsored page for any kind of gear or tech or tactic advice. Easy to reach on there. You pretty much just say anything and I'll be there. As far as Instagram goes, I think my account's been shadow banned, so you may have to find a page that I'm on and click my name, but it's at Stache, spelled STACHE _Squatch. And that's me there. That's an open book, and love seeing everybody's content, and hopefully everybody had a good season.
Yeah, awesome. And videos that Zach's putting out and recording on all of his mountain journeys and all that kind of stuff. And he does all sorts of really awesome ways to make your equipment work a little bit harder or better for you and more efficient if you're using any of the Lone Wolf custom gear stuff, which I highly recommend checking out. This isn't by any means a promotional video, but I've been using a 0.5 and I've got the double steps for the last few years, and it has made everything a little bit more streamlined for me. I'm really enjoying it.
Yep.
So all of that stuff is on Lone Wolf's Whitetail Addictions and their page. And like I said in the beginning, Zach is super helpful and always willing to give some advice to anybody who's looking to buy product or struggling with setting something up. So appreciate you jumping on tonight and all your help on the social media forums. It's good to have a steward of the herd and lead the pack the right way, buddy. I appreciate you jumping on with me. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it, man.
All right. You guys have a good night. Thanks for joining us. See ya.